Welcome to another exciting edition of the StudentFilmmakers.com Community Spotlight interview series. I'm Ora Nicolaiță, your host. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by award-winning fight choreographer Kevin, who will be sharing his insights in swords, scenes, and safety in period pieces. Kevin is a professor, fight coordinator, and armorer, and also offers prop weapon rentals. He is also a SAG-AFTRA stunt performer and serves as a professor of acting, movement, and stage combat at Case Western Reserve University. Kevin is the founder of Fight Designer LLC and the author of both the Screen Combat Handbook and the Theatrical Firearms Handbook. Kevin's profile page in our online community at studentfilmmakers.com is www.studentfilmmakers.com/members/fight designer. For our Student Filmmakers magazine readers, you may already be familiar with Kevin's work as he has contributed many fantastic educational articles published in the magazine. We're also excited to announce that Kevin will be teaching a webinar hosted by studentfilmmakers.com, so stay tuned for more wonderful details on that. You can stay updated by signing up and receiving the studentfilmmakers.com e-newsletter. So please make sure you're subscribed to the e-newsletter. Now, let's dive into our conversation with Kevin. Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Let's start with our first question. As a fight choreographer, when working on a period piece with extensive sword fighting, how do you tailor the choreography to fit the specific prop weapons and historical context, ensuring that the movements appear authentic and fluid during the performance?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with this question of authentic. So we've gotten a lot more information in the last couple of decades on specifically European martial arts and historical accuracy. When I started, there's this one gentleman you could snail mail a check to, and Dr. Pugliese would mail you back a packet of like third generation photocopies of some of these medieval manuals that you'd look at these untranslated things and try and figure out, oh, what are they doing here? And now there's dozens and dozens of books and videos and training groups. There's historical longsword and rapier competitions all over the world. So we found out a lot more about how we think things were done in some very specific places and times. There's also been some great work lately happening with African swordsmanship, with the Historical African Martial Arts Association. And of course, Asian martial arts have a long tradition. That said, when we're doing a movie, we're not usually doing a documentary piece. So it's a little bit different than if you're doing, say, a bit of historical interpretation for a museum that's going to be playing as a part of an exhibit or something. So for the most part, historical sources are just one source of information that we can draw from when making these choices. And directors regularly want to step outside that to be able to show something else. They might decide, well, I want to show my hero's face, and so that kind of helmet doesn't work for me. Or, oh, I really think it would be cool if that sword had some extra spikes and swirly bits on it. And you're like, okay, whatever. And then, also what we have is essentially a mix of like advertising pamphlets for different martial arts schools of the time and textbooks. And real life does not look like a textbook. And our fictional stories don't even need to look like real life. So it's definitely worth checking. It's definitely worth researching. Okay, if we're going with this general time period, what are some of our options? But I don't feel like we need to be constrained by just doing that because the directors aren't, the writers aren't. So pick your battles. I mean, if you're too attached to like, no, but this is the way it really happened, you're going to have a hard time being able to work in the collaborative environment that is filmmaking. So I think it's worth being able to offer those suggestions. But even when it is a historical piece, we have to be willing to decide, what are we prioritizing? What story are we telling is more important than what exact type of oakshot typology of sword would have been used at that time, or would this color have been used as a dye back then, or things like that. We run into this with costumes, with language, with all sorts of things. Now, you look at the Viking TV show, it's got some great fights. It's got some great acting, some great costumes. They have nothing to do with history, those costumes, but whatever. People enjoy it. It's become this aesthetic, but it's really not that much more historically accurate than the old, bull-horned helmet that was kind of the stereotype 50 years ago. So to me, I actually start with the story. What is the story we're trying to tell? And often it's fantasy as much as it is historical. And so then it becomes, well, what are the references you want people to draw? Do we want to associate this culture with an actual real life culture. You know, if we're doing orcs and goblins, are we inspired by anything else? Do we want to avoid trying to reference anything else? You know, we don't want to fall into the trap that maybe some of these franchises have of saying, oh, the goblins are kind of like this ethnic group in real world, and the orcs are kind of like this ethnic group. You know, we need to think about these things deliberately as we design what is the fighting style of this group. How do they solve their problems? You know, are they organized and like to work as a group with unit tactics? Are they more about showcasing individual ability? Do they like to just smash things? Are they more about precision and surgery? Like what kind of tactics are they using? That kind of stuff to me is a better way to figure out character and to express character through what we choose than just looking at a template of, all right, if I pull a book off my shelf of this is what they were using in 1532 in Italy. You know, that to me doesn't really give a story or character yet.
That's very insightful, Kevin. Now, as an artist and performer, how do you approach the physicality and emotional expression of a character in fight scenes involving prop weapons and improvised objects in order to convincingly convey the intensity and stakes of the situation? Additionally, as a choreographer and director, what strategies do you employ to guide and collaborate with actors in achieving this level of authenticity and emotional impact in their performance?
This is a great question because it gets to the heart of a lot of the debates that we have in acting of whether or not an actor needs to really feel it and really commit to it. What does that mean? What are they actually feeling? Obviously, as somebody who is often playing disposable bad guy number 2 and getting killed, I don't want to really feel that. That would be no fun to feel. It helps if you can speak the language of the performer. And as someone who's taught acting at a university setting for over a decade now, I've got enough different sort of paradigms that I can code switch if I know that a certain actor has trained a certain way, so that it'll make sense to them. Because it doesn't matter how good something is in my head. If I can't communicate it to the performer, then it's not useful. So sometimes it's about being able to kind of offset. So it's not that I want you to be careful and aim offline, because that to an actor is going to read as I'm trying to not hit someone and I'm trying to be careful. But if I can tell them, I want you to smack the crap out of that patch of air that is 1 foot on the opposite side of the camera from that person's face. So that piece of air right there, or I want you to really punch as hard as you can that spot where their head is, but they've got to get out of the way first. So as soon as they get out of the way, you just go for it, because they're going to duck, but you're going to have to commit to that swing. But don't follow their head, because I don't want you to track and actually hit them. I want you to hit the air where they used to be. So just, if they can just get out of the freaking way and then commit to that, that's going to be the kind of thing that we want. It really does help if you can train people. And I think, especially amateur filmmakers, sometimes that's just a hard thing to convince people to budget for, because, you know, budget is precious, but rehearsal time is a lot cheaper than on-set time. And so if you can put the time into helping those actors learn how to move well and get to where those props feel more like an extension of the character and their will, rather than just this awkward thing that's been put in their hand, you're going to make it safer, you're going to make it look better, and you're also going to save time when the whole crew is standing around and you're losing daylight and, you know, the clouds are coming in, you're going to mess up continuity. You know, we don't want to have to take that time on set to do it over and over and over again. They get more tired, they get sloppier the more takes you have to take. In order to have an efficient and safe process on set, the best thing you can do really is to plan as much as possible ahead of time. Some of that is going to be about previs. Like, that's the other huge benefit of training, is you can start working the training in so that it's not just for the actors, but we're also starting to plan out our shots. And if you can generate a shot list and be really organized about what you need, that's going to save time again later on set. And then you can be watching the monitor, you can be planning that out and not having to decide, okay, where am I going to put my camera? Because we've already planned it out and we know what camera angle will sell for that particular thing. So I think previs is a huge tool that people need to make more use of. I think coaching your actors in whatever language makes sense to them and giving them time to practice. So some people really need that sense memory of knowing what it's like to actually have some resistance or have some semblance of the real experience. So in the same way that if I'm working with Firearms, I might take the actors out for a live fire training exercise if I feel like that's useful to them. Not all actors will respond that way. Similarly, if we're working with the sword, there might be some actors where what I want to do is get that sense of kind of competitive play out of them. So I might let them mask up and try a little fencing bout with rebaited swords, or I want them to really get the seriousness of the blade alignment and the intention behind that cut. So I might work in a controlled situation with them with sharp swords on cutting practice, so that they really understand when that blade goes through, it's got to line up right and it's got to have that intention, or else it's going to just not work well. And then when they're faking it, they'll have a better sense as well. Or when they're working with a sword that's only the first foot and a half, and then the rest is going to be CG later, they have some sense of what the actual thing would feel like. Or if they're using a lighter weight prop, maybe training a little bit with steel, so they get a sense of how to respect the momentum of that. And then when you give them aluminum or bamboo or one of these other kind of lighter weight prop types that we sometimes use, they understand what it's supposed to feel like and how it's supposed to act, rather than just playing tag with this really lightweight, safe thing.
Thank you very much for sharing your expertise, Kevin. About your role as a director, how do you effectively integrate prop weapons into the overall production design while prioritizing safety and collaborate with other departments to craft a cohesive, immersive, and believable environment that enhances the impact of the fight scenes in the story? In the context of a period piece with extensive sword fighting, could you describe the workflow and collaboration process among the different departments to ensure a seamless and authentic representation of the time period?
Collaboration is so key here, and I love that you use that word. I have a small prop weapons rental business through which I do some of my services as well, called Fight Designer, because to me, it is a part of the design team. So when we're choosing those props, they need to express character, but they also need to kind of match the rest of the wardrobe. Do we, does your Hamlet need to have all black and silver colors on the hilt and in the scabbard, or are we going more with like a brown and brass kind of thing? It needs to match their handedness. Sometimes you have right-handed or left-handed actors, and that's key to know. Their own physical ability. Is it going to be something that's too heavy for them or too long for them? Can they not even draw that sword well because it's too long for their arm length and leg length, and how they're going to be carrying it? It has to match everything. It has to be fitting the world in terms of, should it be shiny and new, or do we want it to look weathered and a little bit rusty and maybe some dried crust of blood on it or something, right? Like there are times when that's a part of the process. We don't want things to always look brand new. We need to know what they're going to be used for. There are things that are perfectly acceptable for background weapons when it's just, guards standing around. They can have, a nice cheap 3D printed spear blade on a dowel that's been properly weathered and painted, and that'll be fine. But then if you have to do a fight scene with it, we're going to run into problems really quickly, because that 3D printed blade is going to crack and chip and bits are going to go flying and the dowel is going to start splintering. And so we need to know, what is this prop going to have to do in the shots that we need it for? It really helps if we can plan out, are we going to need spares, right? Anything that's used for stunts. The film that I earned my SAG card on as a stunt performer, which has still never come out. But they, there were sword fights where they had 4 or 5 spare aluminum blades that they had made as doubles for what was originally a steel-hilted sword. And that was part of the issue there, was it wasn't originally fully designed to be what it was. And they broke all of them in like an hour. Or less, because I don't know if the actors were hitting too hard or if the swords were just not made well and they were using cheap aluminum instead of 70-75. I don't know. I wasn't the one using it. I was using a rubber musket at the time mostly. But they broke all of their aluminum blades, and then against the recommendation of the armorer, they put the original steel blade back on, and they ended up breaking that too. So, there are times when you need to have spares, especially if we're talking about stunt props. It's also important to have different versions. So if you have a sword for a movie, you are usually going to have what we call the hero prop, which is basically a real weapon. It may or may not be sharp, depending on what we need to see, but it needs to at least look fairly sharp in a close-up. And there are times when you need a specific shot of it, cutting through something. If we're using a knife from the tavern, maybe they need an establishing shot of it chopping some vegetables. It's got to be somewhat sharp. But we do not want to ever fight with that version. As soon as that chopping of vegetables insert shot is done, we take that knife away, lock it away, and we bring out a different version, and then we've got maybe our weathered aluminum version that sort of matches, but still sounds a little metallic and has some weight to it and can catch the light nicely. And then we go into the fight version and, maybe we need a rubber one because they've got to throw it across the room and we don't want to, break someone's lighting fixture or whatever. We got to catch it in a tarp so it doesn't get lost in the grass. Who knows? And then maybe after it gets thrown, it gets stuck in someone. And so then we need an effects version. And so then we've got, a cut off, half version that we can pre-apply, stick into somebody's shirt, do a little whip pan, and then do a reveal where it's sticking out of their body. So we're already looking at 4 or 5 different versions of this one prop just based on the scene in the script. So for me, part of when I'm signing onto a project, I need to do a script breakdown. It depends on what capacity I'm working. If I'm doing just prop rentals or if I'm coordinating the fights. I'm not usually the stunt coordinator. I don't usually put myself up at that position, but if you are, that's a budget head. Like you have your own department budget to work with there. So that's part of what they're doing. Prop weapons rentals, I'm again doing the same thing. I'm trying to do a breakdown of how many of what are we going to need? Are we going to need spares? And what are we going to have to make? What are we going to have to customize versus what can we just buy or what do I already have in stock? What can I have doubles of versus what is kind of a unique one-off and I can't really make doubles of it easily. So there's a lot that goes into that. And also then talking to other departments about like, well, if we're going to do the stab, do you have the capacity to do a CG stab? In which case we want just a cutoff blade and we can add the second half of the blade in post-production. Or is that not a part of your post-production workflow and you want everything practical? Some of that's an aesthetic choice. Some of that is just a pragmatic choice or a budget choice. At independent student films, often it's about who's on your team. If you have somebody who's good at that, awesome, use that. If you don't, I guess that's not really an option for you. Let's figure out something else. And so we come up with sort of an ideal world wish list first, and then we end up saying, okay, but on the budget that we've got, and with the time that we've got, the resources that we've got, is this still doable? And if not, how can we tell the story without doing that? Maybe the stab happens off frame, and we just want a close up of the person's face and a sound effect so that we know that it happened, but we don't need to see it, do we? Do we really need to build a prop just for that quarter-second insert shot? It depends. Depends on the genre. If we're going for like, medieval horror, then yes, we want to see that blood and that gore and the wound itself, in which case maybe we're building prosthetics too, or figuring out how to attach blood tubing to the side of the blade so it can pump out fake blood or, things like that. But if it's a historical romance, then we probably don't want to see all the blood. And that's going to change our decisions as well.
Kevin, before we wrap up this interview, could you please share with our audience 3 essential tips for working with prop weapons and choreographing fight scenes, particularly in period pieces?
Yeah, there's a lot of options out there for props, and it's important that you always work your way up from the safest option possible for the shot. And if it won't work for that shot, then you go up the next one, but you never want to skip all the way to real. Don't make real your default. There's no reason why people should be doing running through a field even, let alone doing a fight scene with a sharp weapon on them or with a real weapon. So there's always ways to make it safer. And if you can't afford to do it safely, you can't really afford to do it. So maybe that giant battle scene has to be something that a messenger runs on and tells us about. Or it's a flashback and we just hear the sounds and we watch the person reliving it when they wake up from the nightmare or whatever. If you can't afford to do it safely, you can't afford to do it. And that means having time to rehearse, to practice. It means being able to get the right props. It means being able to hire people who know what they're doing, both to do the fight choreography, as well as to be an armor. You need someone on set who will control those things and take them away from bored actors so they don't start doing something stupid on their lunch break. And who can tell a director, no, do not hand them that sharp blade for that. Thank you very much. You can't have that. Here you can have the rubber one. It's important that you have these protocols in place for everything to be safe and to look good. And once we know there's safety, as an actor, if I know it's safe, I can really commit to the action. But if I'm worried that like this sword might fall apart in my hand and send a stainless steel bit flying out into the crew or over into Video Village or something, I'm not going to be committing to that action. I'm going to be distracted and worried, and it's going to show in my body. So I'm not going to be able to give as good a performance. So safety it's not an either or with safety and good technique. You need both. You can't have one without the other.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your essential tips, and thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your valuable insights on fight choreography in period pieces. We are certain that our viewers have learned a great deal from this conversation. To our audience, don't forget that Kevin is a member of StudentFilmmakers.com network. You can continue to interact and chat with Kevin there. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out his educational articles in Student Filmmakers magazine. Also, keep an eye out for the upcoming webinar that Kevin will be teaching. Join our online community at www.studentfilmmakers.com. Thank you for tuning into this edition of studentfilmmakers.com Community Spotlight Interview Series. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/studentfilmmakers for more insightful interviews. Until next time, keep creating and stay inspired!